A little girl stood in the doorway, her fingers curled around the wooden frame like she was anchoring herself to the moment. Her voice was barely louder than a breath, but what she said shattered everything. "There's a camera in your office." And just like that, everything Dwayne Johnson thought he knew about his life cracked open. Before we dive deeper, hit that like button if you believe the smallest voices often carry the biggest truths. 8-year-old Isa Monroe had survived 3 foster homes before this one. And in each of them, she'd learned the same lesson. Watch before you speak. Watch who smiles with their eyes and who doesn't. Watch who keeps promises and who just pretends. Watch, because the wrong moment could break you. Now, in her 4th home, a sprawling suburban fortress that felt more like a tech museum than a family house, Isa was still watching. Dwayne Johnson, yes, that Dwayne wasn't the movie star in this life. He was a self-made cybersecurity tycoon, 53 years old, muscles swapped for suits, charisma now cloaked in precision. The world knew him as a genius, a man who'd turned data into dollars, protecting corporations from invisible threats. But Isa knew him as something else entirely, a stranger who adopted her 6 months ago and still didn't really see her. She hovered in the doorway of his home office, where sunlight streamed in through vaulted windows and glinted off sleek, humming machines. Dwayne sat at a mahogany desk, talking into a headset, his eyes flickering across a sea of code and financial forecasts. His fingers moved like a pianist's across the keyboard. To the world, it looked like brilliance. To Isa, it looked like distance. He gave her everything, a room big enough to get lost in, a closet full of designer clothes she didn't ask for, private tutors, and the kind of birthday parties kids at school whispered about. But she would have traded all of it for one conversation that wasn't a to-do list. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, standing silently, waiting for him to notice her. 10 minutes passed. He never looked up. The Zoom call continued. Words like encryption and firewall integrity filled the room, but they meant nothing to Isa. What she did understand, though, was danger. And this time, it wasn't the kind that showed up yelling. It was the kind that blinked from behind a painting. She stepped closer. Something about the glint behind the gold frame Sabrina had gifted Dwayne weeks ago. Something felt off. She remembered her mum's voice, warm and brave. Tell the truth, even when it's hard. Isa tugged his sleeve once. No response. Again, harder. Just a second, sweetie, he murmured without looking. But Isa had waited long enough. She leaned, in close, her breath brushing his ear, and with a whisper she detonated his reality. There's a camera in your office, but it's not yours. Dwayne froze mid-keystroke. The voice in his headset kept talking, but it sounded like it was coming from underwater. His world narrowed to the 8 words that had just changed everything. "Gentlemen, I'll have to call you back," Dwayne said, cutting the Zoom call mid-sentence. His voice didn't shake, but something inside him had cracked. The sudden silence of the room, once filled with the digital heartbeat of blinking monitors, was now heavy, charged with uncertainty. Slowly, he turned toward the small voice that had just rewired his world. Isa stood there, tiny and still, brown eyes shining with something fierce and urgent. "What did you say?" he asked, though he already knew. She pointed at the painting above his bookshelf, the one with the serene landscape Sabrina had chosen for him last month. "There's a camera behind the frame. I've seen it blink when you're not here." Dwayne stared at the painting, his throat dry. He remembered Sabrina's exact words when she gifted it. Every powerful man needs beauty in his workspace. It had seemed charming, thoughtful, seductive, but now those words echoed differently, like lines from a script. And suddenly, puzzle pieces began clicking into place with terrifying clarity. Sabrina's questions about his schedule, her convenient timing, her habit of tidying up his office. He felt cold, calculated, played. "How long have you been watching it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since she hung it up," Isa replied, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "I scan the house with my tablet. When I can't sleep, most signals match our network, but that one doesn't. It's different." Dwayne's mind raced. He was a cybersecurity expert, decades of experience keeping Fortune 500 companies safe from attacks, and yet it was this 8-year-old girl who'd spotted the threat he'd missed. "You scanned for signals? With what?" he asked, blinking. At her, Isa shrugged gently, the way kids do when they don't think they've done anything special. "I watched you. When you set up the router, I found the app online." And just like that, Dwayne saw her. Not as a burden or some goodwill project, but as a person. A brilliant, observant, careful person who had just saved him from a catastrophe he hadn't even seen coming. The prototype algorithm he was building, his life's work, was stored on the very computer behind him, worth hundreds of millions. And someone had been watching. He stood, now fully facing her. For the first time in 6 months he saw her clearly, not the girl he'd adopted out of duty, but the one who had been warning him this whole time, silently, patiently. "Isa," he said. Her name didn't feel foreign anymore, it felt necessary. "We need to talk." She nodded solemnly, as if they were equals in this conversation. She didn't flinch, she didn't fidget. She just waited for him to catch. Up to the reality she'd already accepted. He followed her into the hallway. She picked up her tablet, nimble fingers unlocking it with a swipe. "I can show you," she said, her tone confident but never cocky. On the screen, a map of their house bloomed into view. Blue dots glowed where he expected them. Phones, laptops, the smart fridge. But the red ones, those were new. "This one's behind your painting," she said, tapping the largest red dot. "This one's in the crystal vase in the living room. Sabrina gave you that too. And this one," she paused, her finger hovering, "is in your nightstand." Dwayne stared, his chest tightening. This wasn't paranoia, this was real. Someone had turned his entire home, his sanctuary, into a surveillance hub, and the person he'd been falling for had orchestrated it all. Isa looked up at him. "You believe me now?" she asked quietly. He did. Completely. For the first time in months, maybe ever, Dwayne Johnson wasn't the smartest person in the room. Isa was. And she'd just saved his entire life. The house was still. Too still. Dwayne stood at the center of his living room, eyes locked on the crystal vase Sabrina had gifted him just a few weeks ago. It sparkled under the soft ceiling lights, elegant, pristine, and now deeply suspicious. His mind raced as he replayed every moment, the way she insisted it sit on the center table, her casual strolls around the house, her compliments about his impressive office setup. And yet, while he saw charm, Isa had seen patterns. While he fell for the story, Isa had read the subtext. She watched from the corner, tablet in hand. Her confidence wasn't arrogance, it was certainty built on observation. "That's one of them," she said softly, pointing to the vase. "It emits a low signal, just enough to piggyback off the guest Wi-Fi." Dwayne knelt beside it, his fingers carefully lifting the base. With a slow turn, he spotted a hairline seam where there shouldn't be one. Isa handed him a small flashlight. "Tilt it forward," she whispered. He did. There it was, tucked within the base. A micro camera, no bigger than a raisin. His stomach turned. "She planted this?" he asked, not quite wanting to hear the answer. Isa nodded. "And probably more." Her tone wasn't bitter. It was just steady, unshaken, like a soldier who knew the battle before the general even picked up his weapon. He didn't want to believe it. Sabrina had been part of his life for nearly 2 years. Their romance bloomed in the aftermath of his company's rise. her background just distant enough to seem exotic, her interest in his work flattering but not intrusive. At least that's what he told himself. But now he saw how much of it had been curated, how he had mistaken attention for affection. "She asks a lot about your algorithms," Issa said, breaking the silence. "And she always knows when you're about to leave the room, like she's waiting." He sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples. "How did I miss all this?" "You weren't looking," Issa replied. "Not cruel, just honest." Her words landed, harder than any accusation. She was right. He hadn't been looking at Sabrina, at Issa, at anything beyond the surface. He had been so consumed with progress, with keeping his empire impenetrable, that he forgot to secure his own front door. As the minutes ticked by, Issa quietly walked to the painting in the office and returned with a small black disc in her palm. "This one's encrypted, not consumer grade." Dwayne took it, instantly recognizing the build. It wasn't just spying, it was professional surveillance. And that meant corporate. That meant stakes beyond betrayal. It meant sabotage. He looked up at her, stunned. "How did you even know how to find all this?" She shrugged slightly. "I watched you. You learn by watching. I had to." Her voice trembled for the first time. "In the system, if you didn't figure things out fast, people got hurt." Dwayne froze. There it was, the truth behind the truth. This wasn't just about cameras, it was about survival. About a girl who'd been forced to grow sharper, quieter, more aware than any child should have to be, and now she was turning that hard-earned wisdom into protection for him, for the very man who hadn't noticed her for months. "You did. Good, Issa," he said, the words unfamiliar in his mouth but deeply true. Her eyes flicked up to his, cautious but hopeful. For a moment, just a flicker, she allowed herself to believe he meant it. He did, because for the first time in his life, Dwayne Johnson realized he hadn't just brought a child into his house. He had invited in the one person who could save it. That night, the house didn't feel like home. Dwayne sat in the dimly lit study, screens off, silence pressing in from every wall. Issa was nearby, curled on the rug with a notebook, scribbling diagrams and timestamps with a mechanical pencil. She didn't hum, didn't fidget, just focused, steady, like she knew this storm was still brewing. Dwayne glanced at her, still marveling. "You've been watching her," he said, not as an accusation but a realization. Issa didn't stop writing. People like her. They smile too much, but their eyes are always somewhere else. She flipped to a new page. She asks questions about things she shouldn't know, about server names, staff rotations, your business trips. He swallowed hard. It was true. Sabrina had once casually referenced a line from a confidential prototype meeting, one she wasn't supposed to be aware of. At the time, he'd brushed it off as coincidence, but coincidences don't plant cameras in nightstands. He leaned forward. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" Issa didn't look up. "Because you looked happy." That answer broke something in him. She had stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of kindness. Out of not wanting to ruin the first smile he'd shown in weeks. She thought she was protecting him, and the worst part, she was. Josephine entered quietly, setting a cup of tea beside Dwayne. Her face, lined with years of discretion and wisdom, was unreadable, but as she looked at Issa, something softened. "She's right," Josephine said gently. "I've seen it too. The girl's always where the information is." Dwayne raised an eyebrow. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have listened," she said plainly. "No judgment, just truth. And because Issa noticed first. She's the one who truly sees." He rubbed his jaw, ashamed. How had he let himself fall so far from what he preached? He trained governments in digital defense. He spoke at conferences about vigilance, about trust being a liability. And yet here he was, blind in his own home. his life compromised not by a breach in code, but a breach of heart. Issa pushed the notebook toward him. This page shows every time she accessed the basement server door with your backup fob. It's time-stamped, matched against your calendar. He flipped through the data. Precise, organized, cross-referenced. This wasn't the work of a child, playing detective. This was surveillance, clean and tactical. Sabrina had been extracting data from his private server for over 3 weeks, always at night, always when Dwayne was away or sleeping. His eyes stopped on a name. Miles, he muttered. Issa nodded. She talks to him when she thinks no one hears. I heard her on the phone in the hallway. I recorded it. She played the clip, Sabrina's voice soft and calculated. He's almost done with the protocol. You'll have everything by next week. We do this right. Apex won't even see it coming. Dwayne's blood turned to ice. Apex Industries, his fiercest competitor, and Miles, his CFO, his best friend of 20 years. He looked up slowly, meeting Issa's eyes. You're saying they're working together? Issa nodded. They're both spies, but you're the one they underestimated. Silence filled the room, heavy with betrayal, but underneath it all was something else. A pulse, not of panic, but of resolve. Dwayne Johnson, betrayed by his fiancée and his oldest friend, sat across from an 8-year-old who saw through it all, and for the first time he wasn't ashamed of needing help. He was ready to fight back, with the only person who had truly been in his corner from the start. The next morning, Dwayne stood at the edge of the kitchen, holding the tiny camera Issa had extracted from the office painting the night before. It felt like poison in his palm, silent, lethal, and disguised as something beautiful. Sabrina entered moments later, radiant as always, wrapped in silk with a coffee mug in hand and that effortless smile she wore like armor. You're up early, she said sweetly, moving toward him. Couldn't sleep, Dwayne replied, his voice calm, too calm. He watched her carefully, scanning every blink, every calculated pause. She leaned in for a kiss, but he stepped back, holding the device up between them. This was behind the painting you gave me. Sabrina froze, her expression unreadable for a split second. Then came the practiced surprise, her eyebrows lifting just enough, her lips parting like a soap opera star caught in the act. What is that? She asked, soft and innocent. A camera, he said. Not mine, but it's been feeding a signal. That's not ours, she blinked. You think I put that there? Her voice trembled, just enough to feel real. And for a moment Dwayne faltered. The woman he had opened his life to, shared his home, his fears, his daughter, was now staring at him like he'd wounded her. Doubt tried to claw its way back in, but then he saw movement in the hallway. Issa, standing just out of sight, watching. And just like that, the illusion broke. He turned back to Sabrina, his voice hardening. Miles, Apex, the late-night logins, the recording. You really thought I wouldn't find out? Her breath caught. That flicker of panic, so quick it could have been missed, told him everything. She masked it fast, but not fast enough. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. Dwayne stepped closer, lowering his voice to a growl. I gave you trust. You gave me surveillance. Suddenly tears welled in her eyes. You're pushing me away again, she snapped, like you always do. Maybe if you let someone in for once in your life, you wouldn't feel so paranoid. She slammed her mug on the counter, porcelain cracking sharply. You really think some brat's paranoia is more valid than my love for you? Dwayne didn't answer, but Issa heard every word. She slipped away, back to her room, shutting the door without a sound. For a girl who had endured so much silence, in her life, this one stung the most. Later, when Dwayne found her, she was sitting in the corner of her room, clutching her notebook like a lifeline. He hesitated, unsure how to speak to someone he should have listened to all along. I shouldn't have let her talk to you like that, he said quietly. Issa didn't respond, not with words. She just looked up, her expression blank and heavy. You wanted to believe her. You wanted the lie more than the truth. Those words struck deeper than any accusation. He knelt beside her, his voice cracking. You're right. For the first time, Dwayne Johnson, powerhouse, mogul, master of control, was completely, undeniably vulnerable. And in that moment, he didn't care about power. He cared about the girl who had been his only truth. She turned away, her small shoulders tight. You said she loved you, but she never even looked at me. Dwayne felt something inside him collapse. And maybe that's what it took. For someone who had built firewalls for a living, it took an 8-year-old to breach the one around his heart. And this time, he swore he would listen, not to protect his empire, but to protect her. The apology didn't come with fanfare. There were no dramatic speeches, no sweeping gestures. It came in the quiet of a shared space, the kitchen table at 6 a.m., the air still heavy from the night before. Dwayne placed a plate of pancakes in front of Issa. He wasn't much of a cook, but he'd tried. I owe you, he said, not just an apology, but a promise. From now on, I listen. Issa looked at the plate, then up at him. Her eyes searched. His face, not for perfection, but for sincerity. And whatever she found there, it was enough. She picked up her fork. That was the start. No more speeches, just trust, rebuilt one breakfast at a time. Later that day, Dwayne invited Josephine into the study. They closed the doors and lowered the blinds. Issa joined them, holding a binder she had filled with notes, drawings, and printed screenshots. We've got maybe one day, she began, spreading everything across the desk. She's going to extract the final batch of files tonight. Josephine, ever the quiet observer, nodded once. Then we'll need to move fast and clean. Dwayne watched Issa as she outlined the plan. No hesitation, no nerves, just focus. She had mapped out Sabrina and Miles's access points, predicted their transfer window, and even suggested methods of feeding them false data, files that looked real but were rigged to self-corrupt once decrypted. You've done all this? He asked, stunned. Issa looked at him, serious. You said to trust me. He did. More than anyone now, they started prepping. Issa linked her tablet to the internal servers and set up packet traps for any unauthorized downloads. Josephine contacted a former colleague at the bureau, a quiet woman who owed her a favor. Surveillance teams were deployed discreetly. No one tipped off. No alarms tripped. As the sun began to dip, the plan unfolded. Sabrina acted as expected. She lingered near the office door, thinking Dwayne was still asleep upstairs. Miles across town initiated the remote connection at exactly 11:47 p.m. The system buzzed to life, just as Issa had predicted. Dwayne and Josephine watched the monitor from the secured room below. The false files Sabrina was downloading were pre-programmed to send back signals, every packet traced, every keystroke logged. She just walked into the trap, Josephine whispered. Issa stood beside them, arms crossed, barely blinking. FBI's got the live feed now, Issa added. They're watching from the van down the block. Moments later, Sabrina's phone lit up. It's done, she whispered into the device, unaware she was being recorded. He's asleep, I've got everything. Then came the knock, sharp, precise. She opened the door to find 2 agents with badges raised. Rebecca Santos. One said, "You're under arrest for corporate espionage and wire fraud." Dwayne watched on the screen. His face was stone, but Issa's wasn't. Her lips curled just slightly, eyes fixed as Sabrina was led out of the house she once thought she owned. You never expected an 8-year-old to outsmart you, Issa said under her breath. Dwayne looked down at her. There was no smugness in her voice, just truth and strength, and as the house grew quiet again, this time it wasn't the silence of something broken. It was the calm before rebuilding. Not a fortress this time, but a family. They had won. Not just the battle against betrayal, but the battle for something real. Something earned, trust, and the promise to never overlook brilliance again, no matter how quietly it speaks. The trap was set. There were no wires, no lasers, no flashing lights, just silence, precision, and three people in a quiet house playing a dangerous game. Isa sat in front of her tablet, her legs crossed, her fingers moving fast. Her screen mirrored the security feeds from every hidden camera they'd installed, small, legal, and now critical. Upstairs, Sabrina paced near Dwayne's office, thinking the house was hers again. She didn't know every move was being watched, every word captured. Downstairs in the security room, Dwayne stood behind Isa, arms crossed, face carved in stone. He'd built one of the most powerful digital security firms in the country, but this was the first time he'd trusted someone else to run point. And that someone was an 8-year-old girl with sharper instincts than most executives he'd ever hired. Josephine, calm and composed, relayed signals from the FBI van parked 2 blocks away. "Agents are in place. They're just waiting for the data transfer to hit 85%, she said. Then they move. On the screen, Miles's IP pinged, right on time. 11:47 p.m. Just like Isa said. Sabrina opened the secure drawer Dwayne had intentionally left unlocked. She removed a drive labeled Final Protocol and inserted it into the laptop. "That's it," Isa whispered. "She's accessing the decoy files, and the files were a masterpiece, harmless in appearance, but laced with self-corrupting encryption and breadcrumb trackers. The moment Miles opened them on the other side, his system would expose itself to the agents tracing him in real time. It was like feeding a thief a poisoned treasure." Sabrina's voice came through the hidden mic. "We're in." Extraction started. "He's sleeping upstairs." Her tone was cool, casual, too comfortable. That confidence would be her undoing. At 89% data transfer, the agents moved. In perfect sync, the front door burst open. "FBI, step away from the device." Sabrina jolted, spinning around as 2 agents stormed in with weapons drawn. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but disbelief. What is this?" she stammered. The lead agent held up a badge. "Rebecca Santos, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit corporate espionage and theft of federal protected intellectual property." Sabrina's hand twitched toward the laptop, but it was too late. The screen had gone black. Isa had shut it down remotely. From the monitor, Dwayne watched in complete silence. The woman he had almost married didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stared into the distance, as if finally realizing she had played a game she thought she invented, and lost to someone she never even noticed. Isa stood up and whispered, "She never saw me coming." Josephine placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She thought power wore heels and lipstick, not sneakers and braids. Moments later, the feed cut as the agents took Sabrina away. Isa turned to Dwayne. "Miles will panic next. He's going to try wiping everything." Dwayne nodded. "Let him. Every key he presses just gives the feds more to work with." And just like that, the most carefully constructed corporate heist in years crumbled, brought down not by brute force or billion-dollar firewalls, but by a child who paid attention, a woman who watched in silence, and a man who finally chose to listen. Outside, the night air was cool, peaceful. For the first time in months, the house didn't hum with paranoia. It breathed. And Isa looked up at Dwayne and asked, "Now what?" He smiled, not the kind he wore in boardrooms, a real one. "Now we start building something real together." Because justice had been served. But family, that was just beginning. In a world obsessed with power and status, sometimes the most powerful truth comes from those without a voice. Isa reminded us that brilliance isn't always loud. It's observant, patient, and often underestimated. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel, or made you see someone differently, then don't let it stop here. Smash that like button if you believe every voice deserves to be heard. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever underestimated someone or been underestimated yourself? And subscribe for more stories where quiet heroes rise, where justice is clever, not loud, and where even the smallest whisper can change everything. Because sometimes the most powerful revolution starts in a whisper.